All right, today we're going to tackle a topic you've probably heard of and definitely hope you never encounter: botulism. It's a rare illness, for sure, but it's caused by a toxin so incredibly powerful that it's known as one of the most potent poisons on the planet.
Yeah, you read that right. And look, that's not just hyperbole for dramatic effect. We are literally talking about the most powerful natural poisons known to humanity. So understanding how they work and how to avoid them is absolutely crucial.
But here's where the story takes a really wild twist. This substance, this incredibly dangerous poison, has a second life. In extremely tiny, carefully controlled doses. It's the very same stuff used for medical and cosmetic treatments. You probably know it as Botox. It's used to ease muscle spasms and, yes, smooth out wrinkles. Kind of mind-blowing, right?
So, where on earth does a substance this potent even come from? Well, the story starts small, with a surprisingly common type of bacteria.
Let me introduce you to Clostridium botulinum. Now, this little guy has two superpowers. First, it's anaerobic, which is just a fancy way of saying it hates oxygen and thrives in places without it. And second, it can form these super tough dormant cells called spores. Think of them like seeds in armor, and they are everywhere, in the soil, in the water, all around us.
So, how do these harmless little spores become such a big problem? Well, just like a seed, they can lie dormant for years waiting. But if they find themselves in the perfect vacation spot, somewhere damp, with plenty of food, and crucially zero oxygen, like inside a poorly sealed can, boom. They wake up, start growing, and begin pumping out that incredibly dangerous neurotoxin.
Okay, so we know how the toxin gets made, but the big question is, how does it actually get into our bodies and start causing trouble? Turns out, there are a few different pathways.
Now, there are a few forms of botulism, but the one you hear about most, the one responsible for most outbreaks, is foodborne botulism. It's exactly what it sounds like. You eat food that's already contaminated with the toxin. The other types, like wound botulism, are much less common, but believe me, they are just as serious.
So what foods should you be thinking about? The common thread is usually improperly stored, low-acid foods. Home-canned veggies, like green beans, are a classic culprit, but some others might surprise you. Things like garlic infused in oil or even a baked potato left wrapped in foil on the counter for too long can create that perfect oxygen-free home for the bacteria.
And just a quick mention of wound botulism. The name pretty much says it all. The spores get into a deep wound where there's no oxygen, and they start producing the toxin right there, inside the body. This is a risk that's often associated with injecting drugs using non-sterilized equipment. Now we get to the heart of it. What exactly does this toxin do once it's inside you? Well, it launches a very specific and very effective attack on your nervous system. Here's the simple version. Your nerves talk to your muscles using a chemical messenger. Think of it like a text message that says, "Move." What the botulinum toxin does is it acts like a signal jammer. It blocks that message from ever being delivered. So your brain is yelling contract, but the muscle never gets the memo. The line of communication is completely cut.
This communication breakdown leads to a frighteningly predictable set of symptoms. It usually starts within a day or so, and it starts from the top and moves down. The first signs are often things like blurred vision, a dry mouth, or trouble swallowing. Then, that weakness starts descending through the body. The ultimate crisis point, the real danger, is when that paralysis reaches the muscles you need to breathe.
Let's just focus on these early signs for a second, because recognizing them can literally save a life. A super dry mouth, vision problems, drooping eyelids, slurred speech, difficulty swallowing. These are not vague, "I feel a bit off" symptoms. They are very distinct alarm bells that something is seriously wrong with the nerve-to-muscle connection.
So, if the worst happens and someone is showing these signs, what's the medical game plan? What's the counterattack? Let's talk about how doctors fight back. Okay, listen up, because if you only remember one thing from this entire explainer, this is it. There is no waiting. There's no "let's see if it gets better." If you even suspect botulism, you get to an emergency room immediately. Every single second counts. The number one treatment is a substance called an antitoxin. It works by basically finding and neutralizing any toxin that's still floating around in your bloodstream, preventing it from doing any more damage. But here's the crucial part. It can stop the illness from getting worse, but it can't undo the paralysis that's already happened. And that is exactly why getting treatment early is so vital.
And this number really shows you the power of modern medicine. While botulism is incredibly dangerous, treatments like the antitoxin and supportive care, especially using ventilators to breathe for the patient, have brought the fatality rate way down to around 5 to 8%. It's still a life and death emergency, but it's a fight that can be won.
All right, let's end on the most important and empowering note: how to make sure this never happens to you or anyone you care about in the first place. Let's talk prevention.
Now, to stay safe, you have to understand this one critical distinction. Remember those tough little spores? They're like tiny armored tanks. They can survive boiling water for hours. But the toxin they make, it's surprisingly fragile. A good blast of high heat destroys it completely. And that simple fact is the key to preventing botulism.
So here's your practical checklist. If you're into home canning, you have to follow modern, scientifically approved guidelines to kill the spores. No shortcuts. For everything else, it's about temperature control. Keep hot foods hot, keep cold foods cold. And the ultimate safety net, if you're reheating stored food, give it a thorough cooking to destroy any toxin that might have formed.
You've heard this saying 1,000 times, and when it comes to botulism, it is the absolute golden rule. Why? Because the toxin has no smell, no taste, and no color. Your senses will not warn you. So please, if you have any doubt at all, just throw it out. It is never ever worth the risk.
So what are the warning signs you can look for? Well, while you can't see the toxin, you can sometimes see evidence of the bacteria that made it. Be on the lookout for a swollen or leaking can, a damaged container, food that's discolored, or anything with a bad or weird smell. Those are all giant red flags.
And that really brings us to the final question, doesn't it? After learning just how serious this is, when you see that bulging can on the pantry shelf, you have to ask yourself, is it really worth the risk? I think we all know the answer to that.